What's up everyone, and welcome to today's video where I will talk about how PMAX Audience Signals actually work. So after watching this video, you will know exactly how audience signals work, how you can implement them in your campaign, which audience signals you should pick for maximum performance so that your PMAX campaigns are off for the best possible start. And of course, you can also apply it to existing PMAX campaigns. So first and foremost, I noticed that there are a lot of misconceptions when it comes to audience signals within Performance Max, right? So for example, people think that signals equal targeting. So when you set a certain audience signal, like for example, an in-market audience for sneakers, then you are actually targeting those people. That's not the case because Google goes effectively above and beyond your targeting options instead of just targeting what you selected. So the signals are effectively just a way to tell Google those are some people that are likely interested in my products, and then Google uses them as a seed audience and goes beyond those. So it only uses those audience to start, but not for actual targeting, which is also, by the way, why real retargeting doesn't work with Performance Max. Also, signals are less important than assets, and that's the last of the three sort of main misconceptions that I see all the time, that people think they can trick a Performance Max campaign into, performing 5 times better just by using a slightly different audience. Assets are still most important, but of course, audiences still have their place for sure, and that's what we will dive into right now. So, first of all, the goal is to use the best seed audience for maximum relevance, of course. And you could say, for example, there is an audience 1 in your PMAX campaign, right? There is an audience 2, and that one has 5%, let's call it relevance, okay? We have audience 2 with like 15% relevance, and then we have audience 3 with, for example, 30% relevance. And what I mean with relevance in that case is, let's say, people that are generally interested in your product. Not to confuse that with conversion rate or click-through rate, of course, that will inevitably be lower. But let's say there are 30% of people in audience 3, for example, that are realistically interested and realistically down to buy your products in some shape or form, if the timing is right, if you can convince them with your pricing, your messaging, etc. We could now assume, or we could now think, that those 3 audiences could, for example, be an affinity type audience, an in-market audience, and that's the last audience here in this sort of selection, your own data. I will talk about that in a second, but for the sake of this slide right here, let's assume that those 3 mark different, let's say, levels of relevance, and the more relevant you are, the more likely you are generally to, make as many sales as possible with that particular audience, regardless of which assets you have, right? So we assume that in all 3 cases you use the same assets and everything, but with audience number 3, you give Google a really good head start, and with audience number 2, you are giving them a decent head start, let's say. What is now most relevant or most important is that we talk about the hierarchy of audiences, okay, or the hierarchy of audience types. And the higher an audience is sort of in that hierarchy, the more relevant and the better typically the performance tends to be. So we start at the very bottom with affinity audiences, okay? So you see them when you select sort of audience creation in the Performance Max campaign, you can use affinity audiences, and they are like they're like the broadest, sort of most simple way to target, right? Those are things like beauty, people interested in beauty, or like fashionistas, or do-it-yourself people, something along those lines. Very broad, usually in the billions and billions of impressions. They only make sense, in my opinion, if you have a product with absolute mass appeal, even though you would probably still rather start with one of the higher points in the hierarchy. Or if you have really gigantic budgets, but I'm talking here about, multiple 6 figures per month, because all the way up to this point, you would still rather go with the points that now follow. Next up, we have in-market audiences, and those are, I would say, the first, or that's the first type of audience that is actually relevant for most of you out there. Okay, so in-market audiences can be things like, people interested in, jackets. It could be people interested in necklaces, and if you search for your audiences in the PMAX sort of audience dialog, so to speak, right, you can select those. So what I recommend is to type in your product name, and then there will most likely be some sort of in-market audience for that. I also have a video, and I recommend you can watch that after this one here, where I talk 50 minutes about how to set up a PMAX campaign from A to Z. And in there, I have a full section on, audience research and how to come up with the best audience, etc. as well. So make sure that you check this video till the end, because I have a few points in here that I'm not talking about so specifically in the other one. But then make sure that if you want to dive deeper into that topic, that you watch this other video. It's here on YouTube as well. It will be linked here somewhere too, so that you can, dive even deeper into that whole topic. So in-market audiences are actually useful, and they are not as broad as affinity audiences. And those are people that are generally looking for products like yours right now. Then we have custom segments, and I really, really like those, because now you can define audiences yourself. You can say, okay, I want to have an audience that is based on people searching for XYZ. You can use an audience based on people that are, visiting a certain kind of website, or that are even using a certain type of app. Okay, so custom segments, you can literally fine tune to your case. While within market audiences and affinity audiences, you basically have to pick what is best for your situation out of what's already there. With custom segments, you can really come up with something that fits your business 100%, which is especially useful if you don't have a gigantic budget and you want to really fine tune, or if you have a very specific sort of niche, right? If you have a very specific product and you think that no matter what you choose in terms of in-market or affinity, there will always be some losses and it will not be that efficient. Then we have general sort of remarketing data, right? Could be people on your site, could be people adding something to cart. Of course, you can argue that if you use pure remarketing data from, plain visitors, they are not necessarily ultra relevant, because there might be a lot of people that have clicked to your site for whatever reason. Maybe it was an engaging, really interesting ad, but they were not that interested in buying. So take this with a grain of salt, and you could argue that in some cases, you could replace those two here, custom segments being a bit more relevant than remarketing data. But in pretty much every case, I would say that both of these are higher up than in-market audiences, but remarketing data and custom segments you can sometimes replace, okay? And they could change in terms of the hierarchy. But the pinnacle of all that are like customer lists and conversion data. So people that actually purchase. And remember, you are not doing retargeting here, right? So there are some people thinking, for example, I did an audit just yesterday of a brand spending about $60,000 per month on ads, right? And they came to us for actual help with their ad account to scale. And that person thought that if they were using customer lists, they were effectively doing just plain retargeting. But that's not true. You just give Google like a seed audience to start with, and you tell them, hey, here are 10,000 people that purchased my product. Find people like those. And of course, inevitably, there will be some people in there that have visited your site before and that have maybe even purchased at some point. But generally, you are using it as a seed audience. And that is extremely important, because don't confuse the two, and feel free to, whenever you have customer list or conversion data, to also use it in your PMAX campaign. I don't recommend to use those alone. Like typically, at least adding some remarketing data and or some custom segments as well can be very useful, especially if your customer lists aren't gigantic. So if your customer list is too small, Google may not be able to identify new customers at scale that are like yours, right? Remember, the more conversion data you have, the more data you have in general, the more accurate will be those like extrapolations where Google thinks about or tries to find people like those. So that's like the audience hierarchy. Whenever possible, work your way from the top to the bottom, and only use affinity audiences, for example, in some very, very rare circumstances, if any, actually. So now you have these search themes in your signals as well, and that's a beta feature. From what I can see, it's available in virtually all accounts at this point in time. But when you create your audience signals for your asset group, right? Remember, audience signals are always placed in the asset group level or on the asset group level. You have this search themes option here as well, where it says add search themes up to 25. I recommend to use them pretty much all the time, okay? So when you are at that step here, just add 25 relevant search themes. You can use them from your search term report and check what has been performing the best. If you don't have a lot of search terms in your report right now because you have been using PMAX only, where you don't get direct insights, you can use the insights tab of your PMAX campaign. You can also do some keyword research yourself in the keyword planner. You can ask ChatGPT for help, whatever you might want to do. You want to get some keywords into those search themes, and that should be targeted, of course, towards the products you sell in that specific asset group. So if you sell shampoo in that asset group, right, then you would come up with a lot of search themes around shampoo, and ideally around that exact type of shampoo that you sell, right, with those features and, and so on and so forth. Keep those things, as always, as relevant and as specific as possible. So here are some final points on audience signals that are also important that we may not have talked about specifically in that way. First of all, don't do audience testing all the time, right? I see this, people use 10 different asset groups and the only thing that they test is audiences. Don't get me wrong, we have done that in the past as well, and in some very rare cases we still do, but in general, testing audiences is not the best way to go about it. Like, audiences are not what will make or break your PMAX campaign, at least most of the time. It's assets that are more important, I will talk about in a second. So you can do it early. Let's say you can use 2-3 different asset groups with 2-3 different audiences to find out which is the best that which is the one that performs best right off the bat, and then focus on that one, because remember, it's just a head start for Google. But don't use it as a continuous testing mechanism. Don't always just run on audiences, because Google will just go above and beyond anyway. Then don't stuff every audience you can find in your campaigns, right? When you run a new asset group, it's very tempting to fill all the gaps and to use, in-market audiences, affinity audiences, your own data, remarketing data, customer lists, custom segments, you name it. Stick to, again, back to the hierarchy, to the ones at the top top 3, if not top 4. So top 3 is definitely fine. Custom segments, remarketing data, and customer list. You can add in-market audiences there as well, but skip the affinity ones whenever possible, basically. Also, tailor your audiences fully to the products that you're selling. That should, go without saying, very, very obvious, but make sure that you always use the most narrow audience signals possible that speak directly to the products that you sell in that particular asset group. Use demographics targeting like gender, age, and income with caution. You will find that option as well, and I only use it if I know for an absolute fact that we have a product that is only, for example, for women, or that is only for people above 35, right? And it's not that, that doesn't happen that often. Sometimes you might think, well, we sell a makeup product, so of course we only want to target women, and because our product is in the XYZ sort of space, we only want to target women of a certain age range. You have to be extremely confident that this is actually your core audience if you want to do it, because I've seen numerous cases where we did demographics targeting and we ended up not performing as well, just because performance can be all over the place, and especially Google is not as sophisticated when it comes to demographics targeting, in my opinion, compared to Meta. So take this with a grain of salt. But then it can be useful if you know for a fact what your audience looks like. And last but not least, make products, of course, your main criteria for asset groups. So whenever you're structuring your asset group, your products should be the most important differentiation factor across these different asset groups. And then you want to layer your audiences on top of that. This goes to the first point that I mentioned here. Don't do pure audience testing, meaning you have 3 asset groups and the only thing you change is the audience and everything else is the same. So products are still your main criteria, as well as, of course, assets, which is the most important point, arguably, about the whole exercise right here. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video so far, and if you basically need help with your Performance Max campaign, and if you say, hey, we have struggled scaling, we have struggled understanding the concept of audiences, we want to take it to the next level, we're stuck at 100K per month, we want to hit 200K, whatever it might be, we have case studies for virtually any sales level imaginable, all the way up to $2.5 million in monthly revenue that one of our clients is hitting at the moment. And if that sounds interesting to you, if you want to scale your e-commerce brand to the next level, you have some existing sales already, meaning you have proof of concept, and you just want to put gasoline on the fire without just targeting your own brand terms, without doing impressions and focusing on vanity metrics, then make sure to check the link in the description for our Ignite framework call, where we will sit down, talk about your brand, give you an exact roadmap of what could be, what might be the potential for your brand in terms of revenue levels, and some exact next steps that are fully actionable. And that, I'm sure, will help you take your brand to the next level, and then you can decide whether you want to work with us or not, and just take it for yourself, and we call it a day, basically. So make sure to check the link in the description if that's interesting for you. If you enjoyed this video, then please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to not miss out on any performance marketing and Google Ads content for e-commerce. With that being said, I really look forward to see you in the next video again. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.